Well, you're obviously the resilient people at this event because you're still here. Well done for that. This session on the... This Resilience Council session is going to look very briefly now with the time available at 4 key areas: crisis management planning, sustainability, need for real-time information and crisis communications. And we've got an expert panel here, but not much time. So, Jill, can I start with you? You're head of Global Health Assured. I didn't know about that company, and so I'm sure other people won't. Just tell me in 30 seconds what you do.
Right. Innovative new protocols based on clinical testing and methodology. Absolutely fed up with not being able to unlock destinations and small businesses. We created that with a bunch of medical guys from British Standard Institute. So we're out to be innovative and change the way things are done.
So it's a company that formed during COVID and to deal with issues raised by COVID in destinations.
Yeah, and my background is creating experiences, representing destinations, but a lot of the small guys get missed out. Hence, we've done that and brought in expertise from other sectors.
Okay. What does crisis management planning mean, would you say?
I think that it means a lot of things to different people. And I think what's happened with crisis management is that there are people who have done it in a very tokenistic way. They've actually said, yes, we can do crisis management. But what is interesting, when you look at some of the larger companies who have got ingrained in them great protocols, great risk management, they're the guys that have been able to actually fulfill and deliver. If you take Silversea, just by dint of the business they're in, the captive audience, the 12-day at sea, which is the average, their protocols were superb. So to answer your question, crisis management is, yes, it is managing crises, but the other thing is also being able to have the resources and the infrastructure under that crisis management that means you can actually fulfill. And there's been huge amounts of, I'm not going to be rude, but I think there's so many inconsistencies across government. I think there's inconsistencies across hospitality, because in many ways what we haven't got is a unified body that has said this is what the standard is.
When a unified body, are you talking about a global body? Because that would be a difficult thing to just pull out of a hat, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be, but it was talked about last week in a couple of weeks ago in Portugal. So all I'm saying is that I don't think there's enough harmony across the standards. And that's what's actually caused so many sort of, I think, issues around how business have been able to actually plan around the pandemic. So I'll give you an example. You've got WTTC that did safe travels. You've got Accor who did things with Bureau Veritas on what was marketing, you're safe. But really, it's much, much deeper than that. It comes back to governments, organizations like World Health Organization working together. And I think the pandemic has shown us that normally when we've seen disasters contained in an area. What this has done is actually seen a disaster that's actually gone global, but it's gone through each of the sort of customer touch points in travel and in work. And I think that's where I see that crisis management has to be rethought in very many ways. And at the moment, I think there's lip service paid to it. And hence the Resilience Council is getting together to create innovation with technology, science, new protocols, communication, because never before have we had to look at a new narrative, but also deeply into the risk management protocols of a lot of the companies. I'll give you one example. Japan, very well-known travel company, has used this time of the pandemic, no business, to actually re-look at risk management. So a lot of people have had to wake up. And, and particularly when we've got a fragmented market, what we're trying to do here is actually, I think it's about collaboration, fertilization, and putting things together. And yes, I do believe we should have a world standard, whether it's an ISO or it's the British Standard Institute, we need to do something.
Okay, just to go back to a point you made at the beginning when you mentioned Silversea, have the companies that have coped with COVID best and maybe the destinations been those that have experience at dealing with crises? For example, airlines, cruise lines, containing infections on board and so on is, so, you know, it's understandable in a way if other businesses didn't have the same sort of plans.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think we should be vindictive, and there's a lot of criticism, but I think where you've got resources and you've got experience, the tendency is that the crisis is managed much better. You know, there's, you know, definitive experience, containment, medical, you know, protocols, checking, and indeed, I think when Debbie comes onto it, communication. A lot of the issues in crisis management has come recently back down to sometimes the communication, because the policymakers are not necessarily the people who should be the people actually creating and narrating what that message should be. So yeah, I'd say those companies, also they've got bigger resources, and I think that's when it's sad when the small guys have missed out because they've just had to lead from what is government policy, and often that's not enough.
Okay, so for travel and tourism, which is dominated by small businesses, surely the initiative has to come from government or transnational bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what we've got to do with government, and there was a wonderful saying, is that those who write policy aren't necessarily the people to communicate it. So I think what we've seen I was on a Ryanair flight where 18 kind of UK passengers got bounced because they didn't have the right fit to fly certificate. So I think a lot of this is not only managing outputs, it's managing the outcomes, but being able to pivot and actually understand how you can actually change things in real time.
Okay, and you referred to the fact that there are so many COVID safety accreditation schemes. Has marketing got in the way, would you say, of when it comes to accreditation, or were organisations like the WTTC doing the best they could to try and establish some sort of standard when hardly anyone else was doing it at the beginning?
I applaud them for what they've done. I think if you look at the AA, where there's a self-assessment from a guest house to a hotel where it's filling a questionnaire and you're COVID safe. Well, if you really look at the customer journey and how safe it is, it probably wasn't. I know it's happened with international hotels where they said do a video of how you do things, and sometimes you've got to think about what is the lowest common denominator, and are the standards that have prevailed up till the pandemic been enough? I say they're not. And those companies who are advanced will look and have the ability to change them. Others, I think, have had to get the message out there because of fear of losing business. It's like Kapinski's white gloves. You know, great, because they've actually thought about it, but maybe what we need to do is work more cleverly together to make it easy for the consumer or the traveller to understand.
Okay, and you said that crisis management needs to be rethought. How does it need to be rethought? What needs to change?
Coming from, while I've worked in tourism, I've also worked in retail and other sectors, and I just think that you've got to have more people sharing the workload and actually innovating. Interesting, you talk to the World Health Organization, while they're looking at data, while they're not really able to actually be a policy maker. And I think the difference now is that we've got to really think about pulling together more people from technology, from science, from communication, you know, and make it actually less complicated. But they're also going to be leaders and there's going to be followers. And I think for the small businesses, I think the tourist boards have actually, some of them are good, some of them are being really proactive in creating care programs. So innovation has come out of this, because it's not just managing the crisis then, it's how you manage forward.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to put COVID to one side for a moment, and I'm going to come to you, Yolanda, to talk about sustainability and climate, because that's the bigger crisis that's we're heading for now. You were at the Evora World for Travel event earlier this month. What did you take from that?
I think the main conclusion there is that this new scenario, this post-pandemic scenario, requires a new framework of collaboration, both in the public sector and in the private sector. There was an idea that was exposed in one of the panels that we also need G2G communication, government-to-government communication. This has happened because governments needed to collaborate because of the crisis. But this is needed also in this new scenario for other reasons. And I'm sure the people here will fully understand this idea. Many of you are travel agents and you are trying to market new experiences, in many cases to long-haul markets. This means that a single destination cannot do this alone because this is not attractive enough. Long-haul destinations, they want to visit different destinations in the same trip, right? This means that these destinations need to collaborate among them, and sometimes they are competitors. And sometimes these destinations are placed in different countries. They are close together, but in different countries. Therefore, this requires a new framework, a new way of thinking how to do this and how to develop these products and services, because these products and services are going to be more and more sophisticated and more complex every time. So this is a new way to approach these things that goes above political borders, geographical borders. It's a new way of thinking. This is at the public sector level. But then within the private sector, we're seeing that companies need to come together and build associations that are different to the ones before. Before, companies came together to do lobbying. That's what they did. Or they did, they tried to foster, they did these clusters because they needed to exchange best practices and so on. Now, the objective is different. They need to come together to commercialize these new products and services. So they have to join, as in a private, like in a private company to which all of them belong, to position these products, because every time it's more complicated. And I will come back to the same, I will get back to the same example before. These people here, they have been talking about new experiences all the time during these 2 or 3 past days. And if you want to come up with a very sophisticated experience, you need a lot of small stakeholders working together. If you do something with like 1 or 2 or 3 of them, or it's just a hotel and a restaurant, that's not even enough anymore. You know that your customers are looking for something that is a lot more complex than that. So you need to work with farmers, fishers, artisans, everybody. So you have to work with a lot of people and to have a business model behind that is transparent, that is legitimate, where there is leadership, where there is a common objective. So these companies need to collaborate together to go beyond what they did before. That's the idea.
Okay, it sounds good, but is it realistic? You know, if we look at what happened in COVID, governments spoke to one another to say, oh, we're not doing that, basically, didn't they? I mean, you know, if you talk to the head of Wizz Air, he'll tell you they fly to 47 countries and there are 47 different entry requirements, and it's the same all over the world. If you look at the companies, the biggest companies in the world, the big tech platforms, they're not cooperating, they're competing fiercely. So why is it going to be different in tourism?
Because of the model, because tourism, in this new scenario, nobody can do anything alone. So if you want to position a destination, a product, a new set of experiences, you need to do that in collaboration with other people. If not, you're going to be meaningless. Nobody's going to recognize your brand. You're not going to be able to position that. So obviously, if you look at that from that scale, that every government needs to talk to all of them, that's not going to be possible in the short run, and I don't think, we need to have a clear objective. In this case, you will have an objective, which is positioning a value proposition in certain markets and doing this at a different stage. So it's going to happen naturally. It's happening already. And it's surprising me at how fast it's happening, how people are changing their mentality, and how companies that were competitors just 1 year ago, they are now thinking long-term and thinking and approaching this in a new way, in a new fashion. So I think tourism can be a vehicle to do things that in other areas are more difficult, and it can also become an example.
Do you think COVID has really changed long-term thinking? You don't think it's expediency that organisations might be looking to work to
No,
cooperate?
people
at
have
the moment?
changed. I've seen it in the projects we do in certain destinations. When I talk to the clients and I talk to these private sector leaders, that they are now thinking differently. I see that obviously you need to, I mean, the business has to be profitable and you need to do it right, but they're all thinking about other things. Leaving a legacy, doing something that makes, that really makes a positive impact. This new collaboration idea, there is something that goes beyond what happened before. Before it was this happened in a minority of people, like what some people define as the creative society. Some leaders and some companies, like this idea of the firms of endearment, of, you know, this kind of idea, or this idea of a conscious capitalism. But that was almost an intellectual idea for a minority before. And this has expanded, and now has reaching a lot more people. So maybe before, it had to take like 15, 10 years to have that impact, and because of COVID, this happened faster.
Okay, can you point to some examples, or an example?
Yeah, I mentioned this example in Évora too, in a project we are working on in Lanzarote, where 120 companies got together in COVID, during COVID time, to reposition the island, and they are working together with the public sector. The companies are, some of them are big companies and are global, but many of them are very small companies, even supermarkets who put money, because they realize that the positioning have to be different.
And positioning it differently how?
More sustainably, having a less number of people visiting the island and with another profile. And with a model that provides more opportunities for more people. Because with the mass market model, of course, it works very well, and Spain has been fantastic. But right now, in certain places, you need a model through which you can incorporate what we mentioned before, what you need for your experiences. The farmers, the fishers, the artisans, the lady who makes cheese, all these people. And if that happens, they will have an opportunity through tourism. They will have business opportunities, and also we will be able to preserve heritage and culture and tradition, which is also key and critical for these experiences. Because if every place is the same, what's going to be the difference? Okay. So this is the social dimension of sustainability that people forget sometimes.
Okay, so two specific questions then. How are they going to have tourism with lower numbers? How will they control that? Will presumably by price, not rationing? How will they do that? And how will they offer more opportunity? How will they distribute the benefits of tourism more equitably?
To your first question, obviously you cannot change the whole model in 1 or 2 days. Of course, there will be also a big bunch that will be going to keep on being mass market. But maybe before this was like a higher value, and now it's going to be larger. So that's going to be enough to make a difference. And of course, it's going to be a question of price, because this is going to be more exclusive. Because if before you had an experience for 100 people, now it's going to be for 15 people. So, and people are willing to pay for that if that's the right kind of value proposition. In the second question is because you need a different service, a different experience for these people. You need to do something that is more special and incorporate these stakeholders that before were not part of the tourism experience. So that's going to happen naturally, because you need to talk to the fishers so that you can take these people to get shrimp somewhere and do it with in the boat, or you need to go to a farm to do something that's completely different too. So they're going to be part of the tourism sector. And then there's the third element that we call shared value. Also the tourists and the visitors, I'm sure you have also experienced this, they also want to go to places where they are going to do something positive, where they can leave also something good for the local communities. That's something that is happening and they are requesting. They want to transcend and they want to be part of the place they visit. So in this project, what we do is we incorporate the visitor, we put him at the center, and he can contribute with part of the money he pays for the travel for some projects we have designed. Some of them have a social dimension, and it's like preserving heritage or professions that are being lost that are very important, or even cultural traditions related to the countryside, through which perhaps you build walls to avoid erosion or to keep the water. And because that has been lost, it has an environmental impact. So they can choose which projects they are going to support, and they're going to be part of that. And they're going to have a connection with the destination because they are doing something that is positive. So I think, and this is something that is being led by the private sector, don't forget that, which is new. For 120 companies that before were competitors or were not part of the tourism sector, working together to achieve that. And that's different, and that never happened before.
Okay, we could explore that more, and we could definitely talk about sustainability and resilience a lot more, but we don't have the time. So, Carlos, can I come to you? Mabrian deals in real-time information, forward-looking data, and so on. How much has the availability and use of that kind of data changed in the short lifespan of Mabrian?
Yeah, well, to be sincere, during the last, say, 3-5 years, at the technology level, it hasn't changed that much. The evolution we have seen is more in terms of the quantity, the volume of data, the type of data we have access to, and also the way that all that data is transformed into information, right? And especially, important to mention, the skills of the teams in order to interpret that information, right? But, however, I would say the largest change we've seen during the last years is the status, the way the sector it is nowadays. And this is something obvious to say after that crisis, so I want to explain that. During the last 5 years, we've been trying to convince company managers, destination managers to use information, to use travel intelligence services to make decisions. And that was close to impossible to convince them. Why? Because the business, the sector, was going really well, really good. Everybody was making money from the sector, not the last 5 years, the last 40 years, we could say. So it's kind of difficult convincing someone, a manager, to change something when that's working, right, properly. Nowadays, we found, it came up a great uncertainty crisis due to the COVID situation, right? And it's obvious that everyone knows that we need information to make decisions, right? So this, I would say that's the main change we have found during the last 5 years.
So when you say it was a struggle to convince company chief executives to use the information, do you mean use it or pay for it?
Pay for it.
Pay
Well, even use it. I mean, I can find examples where they bought it, but they didn't use it.
Really?
Yeah.
That seems dumb.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Okay.
Especially destinations. That's
Okay.
political issues most of the time.
And has there been a shift from companies being interested in backward-looking data to wanting to look forward? Because of course there's a limitation in the forward-looking data. You publish very detailed, very useful data looking forward, but just a couple of months, don't you? A matter of weeks, really.
Yeah. Well, nowadays it's kind of hard having long-term forecasts since everything is pretty unstable and really fast changing. But because of that, it's key to have updated information. So you better have daily update of the information, weekly, not more, in order to know what's going on in relation to a destination.
Okay, and aren't businesses somewhat overwhelmed with information? So, you know, one of the problems in the modern world is there's too much information, isn't there? So it's accessing the information you need. How do businesses do that, or how do you help businesses do that?
Yeah, most of the time, they are overwhelmed with the quantity of data they have, and especially internal data. Now, our approach is trying to provide solution. I always say to our clients, we want to be a solution, not an extra problem, because the manager teams sometimes feel like they have an extra task in addition to their daily task, they have to use another tool, another extra responsibility to face. And what we are doing is making that much simpler, just giving them information they need at the moment they need. That's the key. and forgetting about all the process before making that information possible. So forget about the process of treating that data and get just the insight and use it.
And so what is the information tailored, if you like, algorithmically or whatever to the business, yes?
Yeah, we can tailor-make the insights for different departments, even for a company.
Okay, and how important is the context in which information is shared?
I think this is something that we have learned during the last 18 months. The context is all. I mean, everything is connected, especially in tourism. The globality of the sector, something happening in the other part of the world, it's going to affect you really fast. So you better be aware of what's going on in a global scale in order to be prepared. We're talking about resiliency. You cannot be resilient, or you cannot adapt your company, your destination to something you don't detect. So you better detect the soonest all that changes.
Okay, and how will information and the use of information in travel and tourism evolve over the next several years, do you think? I mean, you said the last 5 years you've got more skillful and now people will pay for it. Will you get more skillful and they'll pay more for it? How will it evolve?
I think all that's going to be simpler. And destinations and companies realize that they have an urgency in order to make that possible and accessible. So they're going to start relying more and outsourcing more in specialized companies, in tech companies, small companies specialized on providing that kind of insights they need for making decisions instead of, let's say, developing their own systems, which is the pre-COVID mentality the most of the times of the big companies. So it's just basically providing them what they need. Just to make an example, anyone today would think in investing to develop their own weather forecast, right? Because there are plenty of them. But all of we consult the provision daily to make decisions. That's how I see the travel intelligence sector in just a few years.
Okay. Information's going to get simpler. I like the sound of that. I doubt it. Okay, if I can come to you, Kayee, from Skyscanner. Skyscanner is a meta-search site and travel agency. How are you providing information of use in resilience planning?
Yeah, so Skyscanner has a multitude of data sets. We've got search and demand data from our travelers. We have surveys that we send out to understand what sentiment is for our research. We do A/B tests internally for our experimentation, and then also we ingest external data sources. Through COVID, we were ingesting Johns Hopkins cases data and combining it with our sentiment data to try and understand what the risk appetite of travelers was at that point, so that we could actually tailor our internal communication strategy around informing and educating and trying to drive confidence. When we realized that this information actually had value for our partners, we actually packaged it up into modules within our Travel Insights data module. For travelers, we're actually providing a subsection of this data. For example, on our COVID map, we're combining the cases data with travel restrictions, quarantine, and test requirements, so people can make informed choices that they feel safe about. And what we hope that by giving them the right amount of data at the right time, we're helping them move quicker into the next stage of the funnel. So in the next stage of the funnel, you'd be looking at what partner to select, which itinerary. And so we found that flexible booking policies that our partners have been working really, really hard on, surfacing those, cleanliness scores, all of these things have really helped people move and feel more confident into, right, when am I going to book now? So I think what's been important is listening to travelers engaging. So to date, we've had, can't even speak, 34 million users of our COVID map. And so obviously the data that we're providing is really providing value. From the partner side, along with the search and demand data that we're looking to carry on surfacing, and as you guys mentioned, historical data is effectively worth nothing with this massive disruption. So how can we ensure that the data is real time so that dynamic and agile decisions can be made? We've also looked at the different partners that we're servicing, and just this week we've launched a destination themes module for our DMO partners to understand the trends of in-market, what people are searching for, ability to potentially think about diversifying travel demand and think about sustainable secondary cities, and building business cases to maybe ask airline partners to, serve those destinations more. So there's kind of lots of different ways that we believe that our data can be used quite holistically to help the travel industry.
Okay, and tell me, how has Skyscanner changed then through the pandemic or because of the pandemic?
Well, I don't think our approach to innovation will change. We are traveller first, and we're always listening to our traveller. We want to be additive, not duplicative with our partners and the industry. We're always going to be iterating and optimizing and looking to leverage our unique data set to the benefit for our travellers. So that's not going to fundamentally change, and we'll still always be using our real-time data. I think what will be changing will be the traveller attitudes to travel, and so we need to support that change and help to surface those to our partners. I think key topics will be increasing focus on sustainability. We know that attitudes across the globe aren't the same in every market, so I think we've got a role to be able to help to educate there. Focus on safety. I think people are still going to be thinking about their health and the pandemic, and then through the pandemic as well, financial concerns, so flexible policies, and how is the traveller responding to these changes that helps them feel comfortable to book.
So you see that continuing through, the next 3, 4, 5 years for the foreseeable future, really?
Yeah, we've got a really specific role in helping, our travellers connect to our partners, and if we can bring traveller insights and features that we believe will drive booking confidence, we're going to double down on that role, because it's a very unique place in the upper funnel that we can share insights from.
Okay, and how will Skyscanner play a part in driving increased sustainability, carbon reduction, and so on in the industry?
Absolutely. So I mentioned the potential for secondary cities helping to diversify traveller demand. A much more immediate and highly impactful item that we have on our platform is called Greener Choices, which has a little green leaf next to the itineraries, which are greener, so therefore lower carbon emitting than the average for that route. And to date, we've seen about 78% of people engage with the Greener Choices leaf. So they've seen it, they've selected it. And the great thing about averages, we can keep moving that. And so then our bar gets greener and higher. So that's one really tangible way that we've been driving it. But there's so much more that we can do, but we're only one part in the funnel. And so we really need to work with the rest of our partners to understand what are the short, medium, long-term opportunities that we can help support around sustainability. So I think it's collaboration as well.
Okay, very good. Debbie,
Yeah.
crisis comms, how has COVID changed your job?
Wow. Well, I would say we've been in permanent crisis comms for the last 18 months. It's been totally unprecedented, and I think it all really stems from a number of things, starting with the lack of any planning that anyone can do. So we've had, all the different lists. We've got our devolved government, if you take it from the UK perspective, different governments around the world changing the quarantine, the entry, the COVID testing. So where normally we would have a plan A and a plan B, we've actually got a plan A, B, C, D. And there were many times, particularly on the every 3 weeks, when we weren't quite sure what was going to happen with the list, we would be tweaking, changing. Things could change by the hour, which really meant that everybody in our team has been on permanent crisis comms from that perspective. And then I think One of the early issues that we had to deal with was the lack of trust, I suppose, out there in terms of consumer trust.
Yeah.
So very early days of COVID, there was a lot of media speculation and real stories about people not getting their refunds and their cancellations, and that in turn created an issue of consumers not trusting certain brands that actually were perhaps not giving the refunds, which therefore then damaged the travel sector per se, and there were so many brands doing great work there. So that did create this kind of virtual circle of mistrust of travel, and then people, if they don't trust a sector, how do they trust the messages that you're putting out in crisis comms?
How difficult was it that travel was frequently the headline news? You know, almost, well, it was definitely in the news every single day of the last 18, 19 months, but often it was the main headlines day after day.
Absolutely.
How difficult was that?
Well, I mean, travel became a news story. And in a way, the media landscape changed totally. So, you know, my team are on first name terms with all the producers of the Kayee and the BBC News, because it was a different story every day. It was the front page of the Telegraph. I mean, the Telegraph ran a travel blog that's still going, that didn't exist before COVID. So from that perspective, one of our clients is Advantage, which is a travel agent consortia, and Julie had never been on television in her life before, and she has now become that go-to person that they ask to speculate, and she doesn't necessarily speculate. She will give her opinion on what may or may not happen, and she's become someone that sits there on TV with Simon Calder taking questions from viewers now, because travel is this daily news story.
Do you think travel will remain in the news to a greater extent than in the past, once the immediate furore dies down?
Well, I think it probably will, because there's been a lot more interest from media that I would say are not the normal travel media, so the general reporters. But I think also what it's shown is, and it's been in the news because consumers care, because they care about their holidays, and they've missed it, and they want to know what they can do, what they can't do, how much they can trust a destination, how they feel about whether they want to risk being stuck somewhere. And I don't think that's going to change for a long time. So I think there'll be a lot of interest in consumers changing how they behave, and some of the stuff, like we talk about the sustainability and community, and those are all the kind of things that people want to see. The media will want to see, is that real? Does that play out? How have local communities adapted post-COVID? Which countries are doing well? How have things changed? So I think it's here for the long term.
And how do you deal with the diversity of channels now?
Well, again, that's another great example, Ian, of how much has changed. I mean, we've got two aspects, I suppose. We've got fake news, which was always there before, but what we found, particularly during COVID and having to deal with on a sort of crisis management basis, was that the normal people were putting out their opinions, whether they were true or not, and they weren't just talking at the school gates or the pub, because we weren't in the school or the pubs, so they were going, social media went mad from that perspective. And then we had new channels like TikTok that really grew, and they had the usual channels of Instagram and Facebook. And so the challenge for a PR team is not just about messaging, but it's actually some of the fake news that's out there. We're suddenly having to think about SEO and PPC, and how do we get some of these messages that aren't even true down the search engine list.
How do you?
How do you? Well, that's what I mean. It's more than a press release. You have to put out positive stories. You tell. You go to your storytelling, and you talk about the authentic stories that are there. You're honest and modest, and you tell real stories. And I think and it is about being real when you can, because I think the other big change that we saw is that normally in any crisis, and you can imagine, I've been in PR many, many years, you find there's empathy somewhere. People have a natural empathy for any destination or people that are in crisis. But the world was in crisis. So everybody in the world, they knew someone that was affected by COVID, whether they'd lost their job, they might have lost their own job, they might have been on furlough, someone they knew might be ill, or died. They've got the mental stress of either homeschooling or quarantine and being stuck at home. So they had no empathy for really what was going on in the travel business and the destinations around the world. So you're also battling about that because they had crisis fatigue. And normally you will find the more people receptive to messages during crisis management, and the world was not receptive, so it just makes it even more challenging.
Okay, so that's quite a lot to have to deal with. What does it all mean then, Debbie, for you and your role?
I think we'll be in business for a while yet. I think it's all about going forward. It's about storytelling and looking at where we can be real with our stories, being factual. I think it's important. Any of the clients that we deal with, you have to talk to the media from a factual and honest perspective. In a way, I think the way that the social media has gone so viral that actually it's an opportunity for many brands, and particularly you talk about smaller companies, because now it's absolutely okay with all the high definition phones to go out there and do your own podcasts, do your own stories, and that is a way to try and negate some of the stories that are out there. You can go out there and tell your story. And we heard earlier, didn't we, from Google about how many of Gen Z spend an hour a day on YouTube. So, video is suddenly a really, really important part of communicating in the future.
Okay. We've already overrun time. I'm going to ask everybody one question and put it to everybody. So you'll have to give me a snappy answer. And I'll start with you, if I may, Jill. What have you learned? What one thing, or maybe two things, have you learned about crisis management planning during the pandemic?
Lack of harmonization, really, and the need for cross-fertilization beyond the travel sector, just really to get people working technology, but also looking at people who are actually on the ground developing new product. I just think more's got to be done.
Okay. Yolanda, one thing.
I learned that in the toughest times, you find the most challenging opportunities.
Okay. Carlos?
I would say I learned, I think everyone is going to be with me, the importance of traveling. I mean, we have realized the basic need of traveling, how important it is for our lives when we were just locked down. I think it's one of the main lessons.
Okay. Kayee?
I would say the adaptability and resilience of travelers. There's been unprecedented change, unprecedented complexity, but people are still determined to travel. So I think being able to connect at the right time will ensure that our recovery is sustained and much faster. But I think I've been impressed by, as humans, if we're determined to do something, we'll get through it and we'll do it.
Debbie?
I think humanity from two perspectives. One is that every citizen has become a journalist, and from that perspective, from HuffPost being accessed through Yahoo, etc., any story can get out there, to also that I think as an industry and as people, we've become a lot more collaborative and honest. I have never seen so many TV interviews where a CEO said, actually, I don't know the answer. And I think that's something that will be with us always and is a good thing.
Okay. As a journalist, I would dispute the fact that everyone's become a journalist. Look, from that discussion, I took several things that I'm really not sure about. Competitors are going to cooperate. Information is going to get simpler. I do not believe that. We've become more honest, really. And crisis management needs to be rethought. That's probably true. The one thing that strikes me is that the Resilience Council was established in 2016 primarily in response to the global terror threat at the time, with a view to helping destinations with crisis preparedness and recovery and so on. And that threat hasn't gone, but of course it has been diminished over the previous few years, although it may yet return on a, God knows, on a worse scale. But a key lesson of the last 20 months, really, is that the threat you most expect may not be the one that materializes. And you can misjudge the nature of the threat even when you have plans that you think will address it. So the UK government spied COVID and pulled out its plans for dealing with swine flu, which is a completely different disease, and therefore its initial plans through the first months of the crisis they responded totally in the wrong way despite having a plan. So that's enough from me. Please thank the panel, Kayee, Jill, Yolanda, Carlos, and Debbie.